a big week in politics, obviously, with the re-election of Donald Trump as president. WGN political analyst Paul Lisnek now joining us to talk more about the national scene of politics and some local stuff as well. Good morning.
We just need a couple of hours. All right. Go ahead.
Pretty much. Talk about what we saw on Tuesday, because we had swing states and they all swung towards Donald Trump. Yeah. Talk about what we're seeing in that electorate. What is the message? And where do the Democrats go from there? And where does Donald Trump lead? Because it looks like he'll also have not only the U.S. Senate, but the House.
The Republicans are only 5 seats away from the House, 13 left to go, and 17 left to go. And it looks more like the math is there for Democrats, but not the likelihood. So on Tuesday night, I remember looking as we're watching things about 8 o'clock or so, 8:30. I thought, there's no momentum in her favor. And we had that Iowa poll we talked about last week, and so things looked like things could break for her. It didn't. And as things sort of, fall into place now, you look and you realize that Trump actually made headway in pretty much every group out there, almost every group except for college-educated women, and even did better in Chicago, in this area than he's ever done before. So obviously the message resonated. It's interesting that Democrats right now are having internal fights. It's Biden's fault. No, it's Harris's fault. The bottom line is the message didn't sell. Okay. And so as they move forward, what they're going to have to figure out is what is it that Democrats do. Bernie Sanders may not be all that off base when he says the Democrats have left the working class party. That's what we're fighting with. Of course, some of the Democrats going after him, but he's probably not far off base. The working class doesn't really feel like the Democrats were with him.
And I'm just curious. So talking about President Biden, who was still in office for a few more weeks, obviously, through January.
He can do all sorts of crazy things and do it with immunity.
Well, I'm just curious. Are there any things that you think that he will enforce or do before he's officially out of office?
One of the things that's on his agenda, he's making sure that as much of the funding as been allowed for Ukraine gets there. Because
I saw some stepped-up efforts announced just today.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So he wants to take care of those kind of global issues and step in. But look, Trump has a very strong relationship with Netanyahu, so I'm not sure what Biden's going to accomplish with regard to the Middle East situation. And with regard to Ukraine and Russia, we see where that's going to go, because we know where Trump's feelings go, which, of course, is that he's so aligned with Putin. I think he'll do that. The question that I'm fascinated by is, will he, on his way out the door, pardon his son, who faces jail time and more trials? Will he do it? Biden said just the other day he will not pardon him. He can do what he wants, but I'll be honest, it's your son. You're on your way out the door. No one's going to do it. And I actually think most people would end up saying, I get it. I see why he did it. But we'll see if he sticks with his word.
We can talk about movements within the cabinet, but let's talk about the Supreme Court for a moment, because this is we have a vast majority of conservatives on the Supreme Court, and it's likely that we're going to have maybe 1, 2 of those.
2 of them are in there. Clarence Thomas, almost 80, more or less, and Alito in his mid-70s. So both of them, it is thought, they'll get pressure on them to step down. Thomas apparently wants to retire anyway. They would never have done it under a Harris presidency. So what does that mean? It means President Trump gets to appoint 2 50-year-old Thomas Alitos, and now you have basically 5 of that conservative ilk there, along with John Roberts. So it would be very tough. That's a generation's ahead's worth of very conservative decisions.
I need to ask your opinion on something that I saw, because Justice Sotomayor has had some health issues, and there's some wild theory out there that she might step down in this
window?
In this window that they have, where they still have a Senate majority, and the Democrats and President Biden would name a replacement for her.
Well, Sean, it's not a wild theory. I mean, there is some pressure on Sotomayor to step down. The thing is, there's only one person on the planet who can determine whether she does that, and that's Sotomayor, right? Remember that Obama had put pressure, it's reported, on Ruth Bader Ginsburg to step down, and she refused to do it, and we know what happened there. So here, Sotomayor, who's fought diabetes her whole life, she's only 70, so she's not really up there, but there is a fear, concern, that her health issues could pose a problem over the next 4 years. So the point is, if she did agree to step down, could the Democrats get a replacement appointed? Yeah. Remember, the Republicans did it when Ginsburg passed away with 2 weeks left, and they got it done. It absolutely could happen. But right now, she's giving no indication, Sotomayor, that she plans to step down.
And I want to get your thoughts on one of the local races, Cook County State's Attorney. So outgoing Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, often criticized for people saying not tough on crime. Now we have Eileen O'Neill Burke, just in terms of her experience and just kind of the the platform that she ran on. What are your thoughts in terms of how she will enforce being
Look,
tougher on?
she sort of saw her win coming early on. She wouldn't debate Bob Fioretti, who was the Republican candidate, and basically was, oh, ahead, I've got meetings to do. She was planning for this victory, which, of course, there was little question about. She talks about getting guns and assault weapons off the street, but one of the things you both know is we just had a ruling from a federal court in Illinois knocking down the assault weapons ban in Illinois. That battle's yet to come. So, you know, it's not within her power to just make that happen. An act which was passed a couple of years ago and now has been suspended, and things are back in control in terms of people wanting assault weapons. That'll have to work its way through the system. I'm shifting off a little bit, but it wouldn't surprise me if that ultimately makes it to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court in 2015 in the Heller case said, yes, we have a right to guns to protect ourselves, but by the way, we're not saying right now whether there might be other restrictions that are appropriate. That was Scalia that said that. Well, so what kind of guns can people own? The court has not dealt with that. This would be a case that they could deal with. And with this conservative nature of the court, they could look and say, yes, it's fine for people to own assault weapons. That's up to the court to decide. They could look at it and say it's a weapon of war. You're not entitled to own those. Or they can say, look, it's an absolute right to own arms.
Trump term 2. What are we going to see in those first 100 days? Do you
Well,
think?
apparently, on close to day one, you've already heard in fact, Stephen Miller, one of his key advisors, has said deportations will start on day one. So we'll see what happens. Trump himself has said budget is no concern there when he was asked about that, because, you know, it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars to do the efforts. But look, he's got a lot of support around the country to do it. So will you see people being being exported? Yes, or deported. And it's going to start, he says, with those who are criminals. Very little disagreement among people about whether criminals should be deported. But the question is, after that, when does he go to sort of regular people who've been here a very long time but just don't happen to be documented? We remember those images from 4 or more years ago where we saw moms being taken from their kids and all that kind of stuff. Are we back to those days coming? I don't know, but it would be within his promise.
And what differences, similarities do you think we'll see in his second term?
Well, I think you'll see an emboldened Trump. I think the first time around, he was surrounded by a bunch of guardrails because he himself said, you know, this is new to me, so I'm going to put people who know what they're doing. Now he knows what he's doing, so he will surround himself with people who will not stand in his way and who will absolutely say yes. So he just today said, or yesterday said, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, not going to be in his government. Those are two people who have independent minds. Goodbye, Nikki. Goodbye, Mike.
It certainly will be an interesting show you have coming up at 9 o'clock with Congressman Mike Quigley.
Congressman Mike Quigley is going to join me, along with former Congresswoman Marie Newman and Aaron Del Mar, co-chair of the Republican Party. We're going to talk all about what's transpired this week.
All right, Paul, thank you so much. That's
Thank you,
coming
guys.
up in just 20 minutes.
Join us.
All right, and coming up next, we have